Jake stood on the crystal platform, still breathing hard from his fight with Grimmex. The massive Vorthic warrior was being carried away by his own people, alive but deeply unconscious. The other Vorthic warriors were already boarding their ships, following the ancient law that said they had to leave when their leader was defeated. The amphitheater was still buzzing with excitement. Thousands of aliens were talking at once, their voices creating a symphony of amazement and confusion. Jake could hear his name being repeated in dozens of different languages. Princess Zara stood beside him on the platform, her crystalline gown catching the light and throwing rainbow patterns across the crystal floor. King Aldrich and Emperor Nexus had joined them, both looking uncertain about what should happen next. "Captain Sullivan," King Aldrich said formally, his golden skin glowing with respect, "you have won a great victory today. The ancient laws give you the right to claim my daughter as your mate. What is your decision?" Jake felt his heart racing again, but this time it wasn't from physical exertion. He looked at Princess Zara, then at the crowd, then back at the king. This was not what he had expected when he decided to fight Grimmex. "Your Majesty," Jake said carefully, "I didn't fight to win a bride. I fought to protect the princess and stop a massacre. I have no claim on her." He turned to face Princess Zara. "Directly, Your Highness, you were promised to Prince Kelvon. That marriage was supposed to bring peace between your peoples. I don't want to interfere with that." Princess Zara's ocean blue eyes studied his face intently. "You will give up your right of conquest? You will return me to Prince Kelvon, even though you won me fairly in combat?" "You're not a prize to be won," Jake said firmly. "You're a person with your own thoughts and feelings. You should marry whoever you choose to marry." A murmur ran through the crowd. This was clearly not the response anyone had expected. Even Emperor Nexus looked surprised by Jake's words. Princess Zara stepped closer to Jake, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "What if I choose you?" Jake's eyes widened in shock. "What?" "I invoked the Song of Chosen Heart," Princess Zara announced, her voice suddenly carrying across the entire amphitheater. The crystals around them began to hum in harmony with her words. Crowd fell silent. Even King Aldrich looked stunned by his daughter's declaration. "The Song of Chosen Heart?" Jake whispered. "What does that mean?" Princess Zara's skin began to glow with a soft blue light, and the crystal crown on her head pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. "It is the most sacred law of our people. It says that a royal daughter may choose her own mate if she sings the ancient song and declares her heart's true desire." She turned to face the crowd, her voice becoming stronger and more musical. "I have watched this human for 3 days. I have seen his courage, his honor, and his kindness. He fights not for conquest, but for protection. He thinks not of tradition, but of what is right. He sees me not as a prize, but as a person." The crystals throughout the amphitheater began to sing in harmony with her voice, creating a melody that seemed to touch everyone's soul. "Prince Kelvon is a good man and a strong warrior," she continued, "but he sees me as a political alliance. He speaks of duty and honor, but never of love. This human, this Jake Sullivan, has shown me what it means to be valued for who I am, not what I represent." Emperor Nexus stepped forward, his metallic skin reflecting his anger. "This is unacceptable. The marriage between my son and Princess Zara was agreed upon by both governments. It cannot be set aside for the whims of a young woman. The Song of Chosen Heart supersedes all political agreements," King Aldrich said quietly. His voice was sad, but also firm. "It is our oldest law, older even than the ancient combat rites. If my daughter has truly chosen, then I must honor her choice." Jake felt like the world was spinning around him. "Wait," he said, holding up his hands. "Nobody asked me what I want. I appreciate the honor, Princess, but I'm just a cargo captain. I'm not royalty. I don't know anything about ruling a kingdom or managing political alliances." Princess Zara smiled, and the crystals sang even more beautifully in response to her joy. "You defeated the most feared warrior in the galaxy to protect people you barely knew. You gave up your right of conquest because you believed it was the right thing to do. You see beyond politics and tradition to what truly matters. These are the qualities of a true leader. But what about the alliance between your peoples? Jake asked, gesturing toward Emperor Nexus. That's more important than any personal feelings. The peace of two civilizations is at stake, is it? Princess Zara asked. Or is this an opportunity for something even better? She walked to the center of the platform and addressed both crowds. For centuries, our peoples have been enemies. We fought over resources, territory, and trade routes. This marriage was supposed to end that conflict, but it would have been a cold peace, held together only by political necessity. The amphitheater was completely silent now, every being hanging on her words. But what if we could build something better? What if we could create an alliance based not on political convenience, but on shared values and mutual respect? What if we could include not just Altarians and Meridians, but other species as well? She pointed toward the diplomatic section, where representatives from dozens of different worlds were sitting. The humans have something we lack. They see possibilities where we see only problems. They build bridges where we build walls. Emperor. Nexus's black eyes narrowed. You speak of including humans in our alliance. They are a young species with no significant technology or resources. What could they offer us? Jake felt a surge of irritation at the Emperor's dismissive tone. We offer a different perspective, he said, stepping forward. We offer the ability to think beyond the way things have always been done. We offer the willingness to take risks for the greater good. He looked around the amphitheater, meeting the eyes of beings from both civilizations. Your peoples have been fighting for centuries because you both think there's only one way to solve problems. The Altarians believe in tradition and harmony. The Meridians believe in strength and technology. But what if both approaches have value? What if the best solutions come from combining different strengths instead of choosing one over the other? King. Aldrich stepped forward. His golden skin began to glow brighter. You speak wisdom, Captain Sullivan. My daughter is right. You do see possibilities where others see only obstacles. But the practical problems remain, Emperor Nexus said coldly. My son was injured defending the honor of both our peoples. The political agreements that took years to negotiate are now meaningless. How do you propose to solve these issues? Princess Zara moved to stand beside Jake, her hand finding his. By creating something new, something better than what came before. Jake felt the warmth of her touch and the sincerity in her voice. For the first time since this whole situation had begun, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that she might be right. A three-way alliance, he said slowly, the idea forming as he spoke. Altarians, Meridians, and humans, each bringing their own strengths to the partnership. And Prince Kelvon? Emperor Nexus demanded. What of my son's honor? Jake thought. For a moment, then smiled. We offer him something better than a political marriage. We offer him the chance to help build a new kind of alliance. Instead of being just a prince consort, he could be a founding member of the greatest partnership this galaxy has ever seen. Princess Zara squeezed his hand, her crystal crown pulsing with excitement. The Galaxy Alliance, she whispered. A union of equals, working together instead of against each other. Jake looked into her eyes and saw not just love, but hope for a better future. For the first time since stepping onto the platform, he began to believe that this crazy situation might actually work. Princess Zara, he said formally, his voice carrying across the amphitheater, if you'll have me, I would be honored to accept your proposal. The Crystal City erupted in the most beautiful song it had ever sung. Jake stepped onto the crystal platform, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. The platform felt different under his feet than it had looked from the audience. The crystal was warm and seemed to pulse with energy, as if it was alive and responding to the drama unfolding on its surface. Grimex the Destroyer stood at the other end of the platform, his massive form casting a shadow across the crystalline surface. Up close, he was even more terrifying than Jake had imagined. His gray skin was covered in scars from countless battles, and his tusks were stained with what looked like dry blood. The bone armor he wore was decorated with trophies from his victims. "So, little human," Grimmex said, his voice like grinding. "Stone, you think you can succeed where the Metal Prince failed? You are even smaller than he was." Jake tried to keep his voice steady. Size isn't everything. Sometimes the smaller fighter has advantages the bigger one doesn't expect. Grimmex laughed, a sound that made the crystals around them vibrate with discord. Brave words from a creature who looks like he would break if I breathed on him too hard. "Tell me, human, what weapons do you choose for our combat?" Jake looked around the platform. Prince Kelvin's broken armor lay nearby, sparking with damaged electronics. The prince himself had been carried away by Marine medics, alive but barely conscious. Jake had no armor, no energy weapons, no advanced technology. "I choose no weapons," Jake said. "Hand-to-hand combat, nothing else." The crowd gasped. Even the Vorthic warriors seemed surprised by this decision. Grimmex's red eyes gleamed with amusement. "Hand-to-hand? Against me? Human, you are either very brave or very stupid. Probably both." Grimmex threw his massive sword to the side, where it clattered against the crystal floor. "Very well, I will crush you with my bare hands. It will be more satisfying that way." Jake began to circle the platform, staying as far from Grimmex as possible. The Vorthic leader was nearly twice his size and probably 3 times his weight. But Jake had learned a few things during his years in the Navy. The first rule of fighting a larger opponent was to never let them get a solid grip on you. Grimmex lunged forward with surprising speed for such a large creature. His massive hands reached for Jake's throat, but Jake ducked and rolled to the side, taking advantage of the platform's smooth surface. The lower gravity of the moon made the movement easier than it would have been on Earth. "Stand still, little human," Grimmex growled, turning to face Jake again. "Running will only delay the inevitable." Jake didn't reply. He was too busy studying his opponent's movements. Grimmex was strong and fast, but he was also used to fighting opponents who would meet him head-on. The Vorthic way of fighting was all about brute force and intimidation. Jake feinted left, then dove right as Grimmex swung a massive fist toward his head. The blow whistled through the air where Jake had been standing a moment before. Jake rolled between Grimmex's legs and came up behind him, landing a quick punch to the back of the Vorthic's knee dot. It was like punching a stone wall. Jake's hand immediately went numb, but he saw Grimmex stumble slightly. The knee was a weak point, even on a creature as tough as a Vorthic. Grimmex spun around, his face twisted with rage. "You dare strike me from behind? Fight like a warrior, not a coward." "I'm fighting like a human," Jake said, backing away again. "We don't have your strength or your armor, so we have to be smarter." The next few minutes were a deadly dance. Grimmex would charge, Jake would dodge, and then Jake would strike at whatever weak point he could find. The back of the knee, the ankle, the elbow joint. Each blow barely seemed to affect the massive Vorthic, but Jake could see that they were. Adding up dot, the crowd watched in amazement as the small human continued to evade the Vorthic's attacks. Even the Vorthic warriors seemed impressed by Jake's agility and determination, but Jake was getting tired. The lower gravity helped with movement, but it didn't make him any stronger or give him more endurance. Sweat was pouring down his face, and his uniform was torn in several places where Grimmex's claws had come too close. Grimmex seemed to realize that Jake was weakening. "Getting tired, little human. You cannot run forever. Soon you will make a mistake, and then I will tear you apart." Jake knew Grimmex was right. He couldn't keep this up much longer. He needed to find a way to end the fight quickly, or he would eventually be caught and killed. Then he remembered something from his Navy training. His instructor had taught him that every fighting style had weaknesses, and the weakness of fighters who relied on brute force was that they became predictable. They would use the same attacks over and over, especially when they were angry. Jake deliberately slowed down, letting Grimmex think he was more tired than he actually was. The Vortic leader took the bait, charging forward with both arms spread wide, intending to grab Jake in a bear hug that would crush every bone in his body at the last second. Jake dropped to the ground and swept his leg across Grimmex's ankles. The massive Vortic, moving too fast to stop, tripped and went flying across the platform. He hit the crystal floor hard, his armor cracking against the surface. Jake was on him in an instant. He jumped onto Grimmex's back and wrapped his arms around the Vortic's thick neck, applying a chokehold he had learned in military training. It was a move designed to cut off blood flow to the brain, causing unconsciousness in seconds. But Grimmex was not human, and his neck was thick with muscle and bone. Jake squeezed as hard as he could, but the Vortic was already starting to get back to his feet. "Get off me, human!" Grimmex roared, reaching back to grab Jake. Jake held on desperately, knowing that if he let go now, he would never get another chance. He could feel Grimmex's claws tearing at his uniform, trying to get a grip on him. The crowd was on its feet now, aliens from both civilizations shouting encouragement. Jake could hear Princess Zara's voice above the others, calling his name, Grimmex. Staggered across the platform, trying to shake Jake off. But the human held on with grim determination, his arms locked around the Vortic's neck. Jake could feel his own strength fading, but he could also feel Grimmex's movements becoming less coordinated. The chokehold was working, but slowly, too slowly. Then Jake remembered the pressure points his instructor had taught him. Every species had them, places where the right pressure could cause unconsciousness or paralysis. He shifted his grip, searching for the spot where Grimmex's neck met his skull. There, Jake found the pressure point and applied every ounce of strength he had left. Grimmex's roar of rage suddenly cut off, and his massive body went limp. The Vortic leader collapsed to the crystal floor, unconscious. Jake rolled away from the fallen giant, gasping for breath. His uniform was torn and bloody, and his entire body ached, but he was alive. The amphitheater erupted in cheers. Altarians and Meridians were on their feet, applauding the human who had defeated the most feared warrior in the galaxy. Even some of the Vortic warriors looked impressed. Jake struggled to his feet, swaying slightly from exhaustion. He looked around at the cheering crowd, still hardly believing what had just happened. Princess Zara was running toward the platform, her crystalline gown flowing behind her like liquid light. King Aldrich and Emperor Nexus were both approaching as well, their faces showing amazement and respect. But Jake's attention was focused on the unconscious form of Grimmex. The Vortic leader was still breathing, which meant Jake had won the fight without killing anyone. That was important to him, even though Grimmex probably wouldn't have shown him the same mercy. "By the ancient laws," King Aldrich announced, his voice carrying across the amphitheater, "the human Jake Sullivan has defeated the challenger in single combat. The right of conquest now passes to him." Jake looked around in confusion. The right of conquest? What does that mean? Princess Zara had reached the platform now, her ocean blue eyes shining with something that might have been tears. "It means," she said softly, "that according to the ancient laws, you now have the right to claim me as your mate." Jake felt the world spinning around him. He had only wanted to stop a massacre and save the princess from a terrible fate. He had never intended to claim her for himself. But as he looked into her eyes, he realized that the ancient laws had just made the situation far more complicated than anyone had expected. The morning of the wedding arrived with the Crystal City singing louder than Jake had ever heard before. The sound was beautiful, but also powerful, making the very air vibrate with harmony. He stood at the window of his quarters, watching the sun rise over the crystal towers, casting rainbow patterns across the entire city. Lisa knocked on his door, already dressed in her formal diplomatic uniform. Ready for the big day? Jake adjusted his dress uniform one final time. The Altarians had given him a special crystal pin to wear, marking him as an honored guest. It felt warm against his chest and seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. "As ready as I'll ever be," he said. "Have you seen Pete this morning?" He's already down at the ceremony site, setting up the recording equipment. The folks back on Earth are going to want to see this. Commander Thane arrived to escort them to the Crystal Amphitheater, where the ceremony would take place. The amphitheater was a natural formation that had been shaped by generations of Altarian crystal. Singers. It could hold thousands of people, and today it was filled to capacity. Jake took his seat in the diplomatic section, which offered a perfect view of the ceremony platform. The platform itself was a marvel of crystal engineering, rising from the center of the amphitheater like a flower made of living light. Around it, thousands of aliens from both civilizations had gathered to witness the historic union. The Altarians filled the eastern section of the amphitheater, their skin colors creating a shifting rainbow as they moved. The Meridians occupied the western section, their metallic bodies reflecting the crystal light like a field of mirrors. Between them sat representatives from dozens of other species, all come to witness this moment of peace. Pete waved from his position near the recording equipment. The ceremony was being broadcast to both the Altarian and Meridian homeworlds, as well as to Earth and the human colonies. Millions of beings across the galaxy will witness this wedding. The ceremony began with the traditional crystal song. Every Altarian in the amphitheater joined their voices together, creating a harmony that made the very crystals around them glow brighter. The song told the story of two hearts finding each other across the darkness of space, and it was so beautiful that Jake felt tears in his eyes. Princess Zara entered from the eastern entrance, wearing a gown that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight. Her father, King Aldrich, walked beside her, his golden skin glowing with pride. The king was an impressive figure, tall and powerful, with eyes that held the wisdom of centuries. Prince Kelvin entered from the western side, accompanied by his father, Emperor Nexus of the Meridian Confederation. The emperor's metallic skin was polished to perfection, and he wore armor that seemed to be made of liquid silver. His black eyes swept the crowd with a calculating gaze. The ceremony proceeded according to ancient tradition. The bride and groom stood on opposite sides of the crystal platform while the officiants from both civilizations recited the marriage vows. The words were old and formal, speaking of duty, honor, and the joining of two great houses. Jake found himself studying Princess Zara's face during the ceremony. She looked beautiful but not happy. There was something in her expression that suggested she was going through the motions rather than celebrating the most important day of her life. Prince Kelvin, on the other hand, looked satisfied and confident. He spoke his vows with authority, as if he was claiming a prize rather than declaring his love. The contrast between the two was striking. The ceremony was halfway, complete when the first explosions shook the amphitheater. The crystal song faltered and died as everyone looked up at the sky. Dark shapes were descending through the atmosphere, their hulls scarred and menacing. "Vorthic ships!" someone shouted. "The Vorthic are attacking." Jake had heard the Vorthic, but never seen them. They were a race of space pirates who raided colonies and enslaved entire populations. They were considered one of the most dangerous threats in this region of space. The Vorthic ships landed around the amphitheater, disgorging hundreds of armed warriors. The Vorthic were large and brutal-looking, with thick gray skin and tusks that jutted from their lower jaws. They wore armor made from the bones of their enemies and carried weapons that looked like they had been designed for maximum pain. The leader of the Vorthic was the largest and most frightening of them all. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, with scars covering his entire body. His tusks were decorated with metal rings, and his eyes glowed red in the crystal light. This could only be Grimex the Destroyer, whose name was whispered in fear across the galaxy. "I claim right of ancient law," Grimex bellowed, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent amphitheater. "The princess belongs to the strongest warrior, not to weakling princes who hide behind diplomacy." King Aldrich stood up, his golden skin now blazing with anger. "The ancient laws have no place here, Grimex. This is a sacred ceremony, protected by all civilized peoples." Grimex laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Civilized peoples? You speak of civilization while your daughter is given away like a piece of property. I offer her the chance to mate. With a true warrior, not a soft prince who has never seen real battle, the amphitheater erupted in chaos. Altarian and Meridian security forces moved to surround the Vorthic, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The Vorthic had planned this. Attack carefully, timing it for maximum impact. The old laws are clear, Grimmex continued, pulling out a massive sword that gleamed with its own dark light. If the groom can defeat me in single combat, he may keep his bride. If not, she comes with me. Prince Kelvin stepped forward, his liquid metal armor shifting to cover his entire body. I accept your challenge, barbarian. But when I defeat you, you and your people will lead this system forever. When you defeat me, Grimmex laughed again. Little prince, you have no idea what you face. The two warriors faced each other on the crystal platform, while the crowds watched in horrified silence. Prince Kelvin was skilled and his armor was advanced, but Grimmex was a veteran of 1,000 battles. The outcome seemed predetermined. The fight began with Kelvin, using his armor's advanced systems to launch energy blasts at Grimmex. The Vorthic leader absorbed the attacks with his thick skin and bone armor, then closed the distance with frightening speed. Grimmex's sword carved through Kelvin's armor like it was made of paper. The prince fought bravely, using every trick and technique he knew, but he was clearly outmatched. Within minutes, he was on the ground, his armor cracked and leaking fluid. Pathetic, Grimmex said, placing his foot on Kelvin's chest. This is the great warrior who was to unite two civilizations? A child could have given me better sport. Princess Zara screamed as Grimmex raised his sword for the killing blow. King Aldrich and Emperor Nexus both moved to intervene, but the Vorthic warriors blocked their path with raised weapons. Jake watched in horror as the scene unfolded. This was supposed to be a celebration of peace, not a massacre. The princes would be taken by this monster, and the alliance between the two civilizations would die with Prince Kelvin. But then Jake remembered something from his diplomatic training. The ancient laws that Grimmex had invoked were older than either civilization, dating back to the first Galactic Empire. And buried deep in those laws was a provision that few people remembered. As Grimmex raised his sword high, preparing to end Prince Kelvin's life, Jake stood up in the diplomatic section. "Wait," he shouted, his voice carrying across the amphitheater. "I invoke the right of champion substitution." The entire amphitheater fell silent. Even Grimmex paused, his sword still raised above his head. Every eye in the amphitheater turned to look at the human who had dared to speak. "The right of champion substitution," Jake repeated, his voice steady despite the fear in his heart. "According to the ancient laws, if a challenger falls, another may take his place. I claim that right." Grimmex slowly lowered his sword and turned to face Jake. His red eyes gleamed with interest and amusement. "A human challenges me? This should be entertaining." Jake climbed down from the diplomatic section and walked toward the crystal platform. His legs felt like lead, but he forced himself to keep moving. He had no idea if he could defeat Grimmex, but he couldn't stand by and watch the massacre continue. Princess Zara's eyes met his as he approached the platform. In them, he saw surprise, fear, and something else that he couldn't quite identify. Hope? Perhaps. The fate of three civilizations now rested on the shoulders of a human cargo captain who had simply wanted to attend the wedding. The guest quarters were unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The walls were made of living crystal that shifted color based on his mood, and the furniture seemed to grow from the floor itself. When he sat on what appeared to be a chair, it molded perfectly to his body, providing comfort he had never experienced before. Lisa and Pete had been given rooms nearby, and they met in the common area an hour after settling in. Both looked amazed by their surroundings. "The bathroom doesn't have any controls," Lisa said, shaking her head. "I just thought about wanting a shower, and warm water started falling from the ceiling. It's like the room can read my mind." "It can," Jake said simply. "The Altarians have mild telepathic abilities." Their technology works by responding to thoughts and emotions. It takes some getting used to. Pete was examining a fruit from a bowl that had appeared on the table. Is this safe to eat? Should be. They prepared it specifically for human guests. Jake took a bite of the strange purple fruit. It tasted like a cross between an apple and something he couldn't identify, but it was pleasant. Commander Thane arrived to escort them to the pre-wedding festivities. He wore ceremonial robes that seemed to be made of crystallized light, and his skin had taken on a more golden hue. The first ceremony is the gathering of clans, Thane explained as they walked through. Corridors lined with singing crystals. Both the Altarian and Meridian families will present themselves to each other. As honored guests, you will be introduced to both royal families. The ceremony hall was enormous, with a ceiling that seemed to stretch up into infinity. Hundreds of Altarians filled one side of the room, their skin colors ranging from deep blue to silver to gold. On the other side stood the Meridians, who looked quite different from the Altarians. They were shorter and more compact, with metallic skin that reflected the light like mirrors. Their eyes were larger and completely black, giving them an unsettling appearance. In the center of the hall stood two figures who could only be the bride and groom. Princess Zara was tall and elegant, with skin that shimmered between blue and green. She wore a crown made of living crystal that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Her eyes were the color of deep ocean water, and when she looked at Jake, he felt as if she could see straight through him. Prince Kelvin of the Meridians was impressive in his own way. His metallic skin was polished to a mirror shine, and he wore armor that seemed to be made of liquid metal. He was taller than most Meridians, with broad shoulders and a confident bearing. Captain Sullivan, Princess Zara said, her voice carrying a musical quality that made the crystals around them hum in harmony. We are honored by your presence at our celebration. Jake bowed in the formal manner he had been taught. The honor is mine, Your Highness. I bring greetings from Earth and the human colonies. Prince Kelvin stepped forward, his movements precise and controlled. We have heard much about humans from our Altarian friends. Your species is said to be quite adaptable. There was something in his tone that made Jake cautious. We do our best to learn from every situation. Indeed, Kelvin said, his black eyes reflecting Jake's image like dark mirrors. Perhaps you would honor us by participating in some of our traditional ceremonies. It would be educational for all involved. Jake sensed an undercurrent of challenge in the prince's words, but he nodded politely. I would be honored. The first challenge came sooner than expected. As part of the traditional festivities, guests were invited to participate in the trial of endurance. Jake watched as various aliens took turns attempting different physical challenges designed to test their strength, speed, and stamina. The Altarians excelled at tests requiring grace and balance. Their telepathic abilities seemed to help them anticipate obstacles before they appeared. The Meridians dominated the strength competitions, their metallic bodies capable of lifting enormous weights. Captain Sullivan, Prince Kelvin called out, his voice carrying across the hall. Would you care to attempt the water trial? Jake looked at the challenge. It involved diving into a pool of crystal clear water and retrieving objects from the bottom. The deepest items were nearly 30 feet down, and the water was cold enough that Jake could see his breath when he approached the edge. The record is held by Prince Kelvin himself, Princess Zara said, her voice carrying a note of warning. He retrieved 7 items in a single dive. Jake nodded and began removing his formal jacket. He had been a Navy diver before becoming a cargo captain. But that was years ago. Still, some skills never left you. The water was shockingly cold, but Jake forced himself to remain calm as he dove down. The pressure increased quickly, and he could feel his lungs beginning to burn. But his training kicked in, and he focused on conserving oxygen and moving efficiently. He reached the bottom faster than expected, thanks to the moon's lower gravity. The objects were scattered across the pool floor, glowing softly in the dim light. Jake quickly gathered as many as he could carry, then began to swim back to the surface. When he emerged, gasping for air, he found himself surrounded by silent aliens. In his hands were 9 glowing objects, 2 more than Prince Kelvin's record. Silence stretched for long seconds before Princess Zara began to applaud. The sound was picked up by the other Altarians, and soon the entire hall was filled with the musical sound of their approval. Prince Kelvin's expression was unreadable, but Jake could sense tension in the air. "Impressive," the prince said finally. "Humans are indeed more capable than we expected." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of ceremonies and introductions. Jake found himself the center of attention as aliens from both civilizations wanted to meet the human who had broken the endurance record. He tried to remain modest, but he could feel the eyes of both royal families on him throughout the night. Princess Zara seemed particularly interested in speaking with him. She asked detailed questions about Earth culture, human customs, and his experiences as a cargo captain. Her questions were intelligent and thoughtful, and Jake found himself enjoying their conversations. "Your species fascinates me," she said during a quiet moment between ceremonies. "You seem to approach problems differently than we do. Where we might use tradition or technology, you use creativity. We call it thinking outside the box," Jake replied. "Humans have always had to be adaptable to survive. We're not the strongest or the fastest, but we're good at finding new solutions to old problems. That could be a valuable trait in a leader," she said thoughtfully. Jake was about to respond when Prince Kelvin approached them. "Princess, the ceremony of the 7 bonds is about to begin. Your presence is required." As they walked away, Jake noticed the prince's hand resting possessively on Zara's arm. There was something about the gesture that bothered him, though he couldn't say exactly what. The ceremony of the 7 bonds was a complex ritual involving both families. Jake watched as representatives from each clan came forward to pledge their support for the marriage. The ritual was beautiful, but also clearly political, with each pledge carefully negotiated and balanced. As the evening wound down, Jake found himself thinking about the cultural differences he had observed. The Altarians valued harmony and tradition, while the Meridians seemed focused on strength and technology. Both approaches had their merits, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something important was missing from the equation. He was still thinking about it when he returned to his quarters, unaware that his performance in the trials had set in motion events that would change the fate of 3 civilizations. Captain Jake Sullivan stood in the cargo bay of his ship, staring at the strange object in his hands. It looked like a piece of living crystal, about the size of a dinner plate, with soft blue light pulsing through it like a heartbeat. The message had come through the normal communication channels 3 days ago, but this crystal had arrived by special courier ship. Jake had seen many strange things in his 5 years as a cargo captain, but nothing quite like this. The crystal felt warm to the touch and seemed to hum with its own energy. When he held it up to the light, symbols appeared inside it, shifting and changing like smoke in the wind. "Still can't believe it, can you?" Lisa Martinez walked up behind him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She had been his pilot for 3 years now, and she knew him well enough to read his moods. Jake took the coffee gratefully. "An invitation to a royal wedding. Me, a cargo hauler who barely passed his diplomatic training." "You're being modest again." Lisa sat down on a nearby crate. "You were the first human to make peaceful contact with the Altarians. That makes you special, whether you like it or not." Jake remembered that day 3 years ago. He had been running a routine cargo delivery to the outer colonies when his ship's engine failed near the Altair system. He had sent out a distress signal, not knowing that the system was home to an alien civilization. Instead of being captured or killed, he had been rescued by an Altarian patrol ship. The Altarians had been curious about humans. They had heard stories about the strange bipedal creatures from the 3rd planet of a yellow star, but they had never met one. Jake had spent 2 weeks on their ships, learning their basic language and customs while his ship was being repaired. When he returned to Earth, the government had been very interested in his story. They had trained him in basic diplomacy, and sent him back to establish formal relations with the Altarians. It had worked out well for everyone. The Altarians got access to human technology and trade goods, while humans gained a powerful ally in space. But a royal wedding invitation was something entirely different. Pete Johnson, his communications officer, poked his head into the cargo bay. "Captain, we're getting another message from Altair Prime. They're asking for confirmation of your arrival time," Jake sighed. "Tell them we'll be there in 2 days. And Pete, make sure our diplomatic credentials are in order." "I don't want any." "Problems at the border. Already done, sir." "I also took the liberty of researching Altarian wedding customs. Some of it is pretty interesting." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Oh? Well, for one thing, the ceremony lasts for 3 days. There are all sorts of tests and challenges for the groom, and the bride has to prove her worth to both families. It's not just a simple exchange of vows." Lisa laughed. "Sounds like a lot of work just to get married." "The really interesting part," Pete continued, "is that the wedding is supposed to unite 2 different alien civilizations. The Altarians and the Meridians have been fighting for centuries over territory and resources. This marriage is meant to end all that." Jake nodded. He had heard about the political situation from his contacts in diplomatic corps. The Meridians were a technologically advanced race that controlled several star systems near Altarian space. They had been in conflict with the Altarians for generations, neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The marriage between Princess Zara of the Altarian Empire and Prince Kelvon of the Meridian Confederation was supposed to bring peace to both civilizations. It was the kind of political alliance that could change the balance of power in this entire region of space dot. And somehow, Jake had ended up right in the middle of it all. 2 days later, Jake found himself standing on the bridge of his ship, the New Hope, as they approached Altair Prime. The moon was beautiful, even from space. Its surface was covered with massive crystal formations that caught and reflected the light from the nearby star. The crystals seemed to pulse with their own inner light, creating patterns that shifted and changed as the moon rotated. "I've never seen anything like it," Lisa whispered, her hands steady on the controls as they guided the ship toward the landing coordinates. "The crystals are alive," Jake said, remembering his previous visits. "Not alive like plants or animals, but they respond to emotions and thoughts. The Altarians have learned to work with them, to make them grow into the shapes they need." As they got closer, Jake could see the city built into and around the crystal formations. Towers of living crystal rose from the surface, their surfaces smooth and gleaming. Gardens of strange, glowing plants filled the spaces between the towers, and Jake could see small figures moving along walkways that seemed to be made of condensed light. "Landing control has given us permission to dock at Pad 7, Pete reported. "From his station. They're sending an escort to meet us." Jake straightened his formal uniform jacket and checked his appearance in the mirror. The invitation had been very specific about proper dress for the occasion. He wore his best dress uniform, with the small crystal pin that marked him as a friend of the Altarian Empire. The landing was smooth, and Jake felt the familiar weight of gravity as the ship settled onto the landing pad. Through the viewports, he could see the welcoming committee waiting for them. 3 Altarians stood at attention, their iridescent skin shimmering in the crystal light. Their tall, slender forms moved with a grace that always impressed Jake. "Remember," Jake told his crew, "we're guests here. Follow my lead and try not to stare too much. The Altarians are proud people, and they notice everything." The airlock cycled open, and Jake stepped out onto the surface of Altair Prime. The air was clean and fresh, with a slight metallic taste that he remembered from his previous visits. The gravity was lighter than Earth's, making each step feel like a small bounce. The lead Altarian stepped forward and bowed slightly. His skin was a deep blue color with silver highlights, and his large eyes were the color of amber. "Captain Sullivan, welcome to Altair Prime. I am Commander Thane, and I will be your guide during your stay." Jake returned the bow, remembering the proper depth and duration. "Thank you, Commander." It's an honor to be here. The honor is ours, Dane replied. Your presence at this ceremony shows the friendship between our peoples. Come, there's much to see before the festivities begin. As they walked through the crystal gardens, Jake marveled at the strange beauty around him. The plants seemed to glow with their own inner light, and some of them actually moved to follow the group as they passed. The air was filled with a soft, musical humming that seemed to come from the crystals themselves. The city sings, Thane explained, noticing Jake's interest. The crystals respond to the emotions of our people. When we are happy, they sing. When we are sad, they mourn with us. Today, they sing of joy for the coming wedding. Jake listened to the crystal song and felt a sense of peace wash over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was glad to be here. This was history in the making, and he had a front row seat to witness it all. Little did he know that he was about to become much more than just a witness.